Welcome everybody to this month's Emerging Leaders, and of course today we start a new Emerging Leaders module. This one is following the same theme as before. As last month, which was communication. This one's coaching. So last month we talked about listening and questioning. This month we're talking about coaching, both key aspects to communication. We've got a lot to get through in this webinar. I had a listening session with a couple of practices over the last 10 days or so, and as a result of that, there's just going to be a couple of changes to the format. I hope that's okay. We've got quite a few new practices on today. For the benefit of those new practices, I'm Paul Ainsworth, one of the directors of the Lincoln Institute, and I run the Emerging Leaders program. So welcome everybody. What you'll see on the screen there is a website for those of you that are used to Emerging Leaders. You're familiar with it. If you could just pull out your mobile phones, hopefully the gurus, you've read your guides and you'll see in the instructions up the front there. If not, don't worry. I know everyone's busy. Just pull out your mobile phone, type that into a browser. Make sure you tick "I'm participating" and then finish the sentence off with "link and vote," and or the line that you'll see it appears at the bottom there. Okay, so Emerging Leaders is, before we get into this session, just want to quickly reiterate, Emerging Leaders is for every single person in the practice. Whole idea of Emerging Leaders is to make you a better version of yourself. It's not designed to turn you into something you're not or somebody you're not. It's not designed to get you necessarily ready for promotion in the practice, although it will do that. It'll have a substantial impact on your ability to be able to do that, but it's not necessary. So the whole objective of Emerging Leaders is to make you a better version of yourself wherever you're at. So whether you are a senior veterinarian or whether you are in support of the nursing team, doesn't matter what you do, we will work extremely hard to get you there. We cover a number of different topics. This one's coaching. Look, before we start, I'm going to just do a little bit of revision though. So for those practices that weren't on last month, that's okay. What happened there? For those practices that weren't on last month, just bear with this revision, and it'll only take a couple of minutes. Okay, so why is it so hard to listen? For those practices who attended last month, just have a little bit of a chat internally. Why is it so hard to listen? Second one, what are two things you can do to listen more effectively? And the third one, name the two types of generic questions that we have. I'm only going to give you about 20 seconds for this because this is really straightforward. Why is it so hard to listen? You should have an answer by now. Let's just have a look. One of the main reasons, you might have come up with a number of different answers to that, but one of the main reasons is, and the one we really want to focus on, is we think 4 times faster than we speak. So when we think 4 times faster than we speak, when you're talking to me, I'm thinking. And I'm thinking and I'm thinking, and sometimes I get really heavily distracted. And sometimes you might say something that will trigger an emotional response in me, or might make me upset, or might make me angry, or might remind me of a story that I can relate to, of a similar circumstance. And so my mind just races. Sometimes we can see people glaze over, can't we, when we're doing that? So that's one of the reasons why it's really hard to listen. So we don't beat ourselves up when we can't listen or when we struggle. But what we've got to do is got to find ways to do it more effectively. And let's have a look. Have we got those 2 ways worked out, everybody? Rule of and summarize. So rule of 3. If I ask you a question, if I have a discipline and say to myself, I need to actually ask a follow-up question based on what you've just told me, then that sort of makes it necessary for me to listen to what you say to me. So if I ask you about your weekend and I know that I've got a follow-up question to ask afterwards, then I'm going to hear what you say, and you say, yeah, I had a great weekend. My follow-up question might be, so anything in particular, or what made it great, or did you manage to achieve everything you want to achieve? You know, if you had planned activities, moving house or something. So rule of 3, and then when they respond to that, try asking one more, and that'll really, really resonate with them that you're listening hard to what they're saying. Second one is to be able to summarize what they're saying to you. And so when you can hear them talking, just take that opportunity to go, okay, I need to summarize this at the end, so I better listen hard and be able to read back. Okay, and the third question, what are the two types of generic questions? Hopefully we've got this one. One's open, and so you should get the other one, which is closed. Remember, a closed question is a yes/no response. Open question is a question where it requires more thought. All right, and it's usually an open question, starts with a particular. We're going to cover that this session again anyway, just as a bit of a jogger, because it's really keyed into the learning objectives for this session. So let's just quickly go through those. First one is to understand why coaching is a valuable tool in our development of others. Why is coaching a valuable tool in our development of other people? All right, so this doesn't necessarily can have a huge benefit for us, but mainly this is how it benefits other people. So that's the first one, and hopefully you saw the pre-work on the website. You've all registered on the website. You're just going there. It's so easy. And have a look at the little extract on the blind side and the movie The Blind Side. And you would have seen there that exact point at play with at the Gridiron football match. So just have a look at that if you haven't had a chance. It takes about 2 minutes. It's not very long. Second one is to understand how to coach. So if coaching is a valuable tool, how are we going to do it? And the third one, why it's often hard to coach and how to avoid some of the pitfalls. Okay, so they're the learning objectives. We're going to start off though with a little exercise. You would have received a bit of Play-Doh. I'm just going to set this exercise up. Just call out if you haven't received your Play-Doh. Hopefully you have. And what we're going to do is going to do a little activity. We're going to do 3 lots of 3 minutes. Okay, so what we need to do is we need to break into threes. If there are 4 of you or 5 of you, I'll explain 4 first of all. If there are 4 of you in the group, then have 2 people making Play-Doh. Okay, have 1 observer and 1 manager. If there are only 3 of you, it's perfect. You just pick a role each, and we're going to rotate through. Everyone's going to get a turn. If there are 5 of you, I would suggest that you have 2 people making Play-Doh. You have 2 managers, and you have 1 observer. Okay. So if there's 5 of you, if there's 6, you're back to the 3 again. So you're happy. Okay. So what we're going to do is you'll see on. Let me just have a look. What page of your book is page 9 of your workbooks? You'll see, and if you go there now, you'll see that there is a series of questions that need to be answered by the observer. Manager, what you're going to do, you're going to grab your Play-Doh and you're going to give it to your team member. And what we want the team member to do is to make a small animal out of Play-Doh. We've got 3 minutes. Observer, I want you to grab the workbook of the manager. So just switch workbooks, grab the workbook, turn to page 9. What I'd like you to do is I'd like you to fill in and answer the sheet over the next 3 minutes, and then manager, you're just going to do your thing, and you're going to help them to build this little animal, and team members, you're going to just have some fun. Hopefully everybody's clear on that. If you handed over your team workbooks to the respective managers, everybody's sitting ready to go. I'm just going to give you another 30 seconds or so to get organised, and then I'm going to start the clock. When you see the clock go, gurus, just make sure everybody's up and racing. Okay, that should be enough time. Let's get cracking. Okay, just 20 more seconds to go. You should have some pretty amazing little animals there. Alrighty, you ready to change over? Okay, so what's going to happen now is we're just going to change roles. Doesn't matter, just everyone just switch roles. So doesn't matter which one you go into, and get ready with the Play-Doh. Just make sure you hand your workbooks across. So everyone's got uh, the person, the observer, has got the respective manager's workbook, and we'll have a read of it in a second. So don't worry about reading it now. Let's just keep going with the exercise, and we'll go for another 3 minutes. Are you ready? Okay, let's go. Gurus, I'd love to get some photos texted through of these little animals if you get a chance. Okay, hopefully you've been watching the clock there, and the gurus have been keeping you a track of the time. You'll see there, we're now going to switch to the final round. So whoever hasn't had a chance at making the Play-Doh, whoever hasn't had a chance at playing Observer and Manager, just switch it around now. Don't forget, uh, observers grab the workbook of the manager, and let's get their score sheet filled in. For those people who are now going into the manager role, obviously you've seen the observer score sheet now, so you have a little bit of a sense as to what to expect. But let's crack on and finish off this last round. Gurus, I'm going to put a challenge out there. The most creative photograph of these small animals. Let's get it. Let's get it on WhatsApp and send it around. And I'll keep an eye on the entries and get a little prize out. Okay, good everybody. We should have lots of little animals, Play-Doh animals now floating around the practice. Let's just have a look at that observer sheet though, shall we? If you turn to page 9 of your workbooks, everybody get their observer sheet back. So why do we do that exercise? So a couple of reasons. There's a number of criteria that we need to do whenever we're doing any form of coaching or training or managing of a team member. There's a couple of points in here though that I'm going to call out as part of this module on coaching, and I'll call them out as I go through. So was the task explained first? How clear were you in setting expectations? So I did a little bit of that as well. So you may have felt as though it wasn't necessary for you to do that, but you can imagine that if I hadn't done some of that, maybe it was necessary for you to do it and set the activity up in the first place. Second one, did the manager tell the team member what to make, or did they ask for suggestions from the team member? Really important one when it comes to coaching, and that'll become obvious as we progress through this this webinar. Did your manager check for prior learning? Always important, and that could have been tied in with the previous question. So have you done this before? Have you made small Play-Doh animals? Do you have a favourite that you work with? Do your kids make this sort of stuff? What are you saying? Okay, so we don't have to get into too much detail. Was your manager patient? I think that's important. I think probably making a Play-Doh animal shouldn't test too many people's patience, but and obviously you can imagine situations which are a little bit more stressful from this, but we're going to start at this level, we're going to build up. Did they provide you any feedback, for a job well done, or that's the worst Play-Doh animal I've ever seen in my life, or that doesn't even look anything like a dog? Any form of feedback's good feedback. Did your manager make the exercise enjoyable? Not sure how you could have done that, but I'm sure there are people who were able to make it enjoyable. Was your manager sympathetic to your really bad animal making skills if they were? So, and how did that sympathy play out? And the last one, which is a really important one, is would you describe your manager as bossy or supportive? Bossy or supportive. Okay, so what we've got here, and it's a really nice segue into this next slide that we're going to go into, which is a little bit more revision. You'll see those comments there, take them away, seek counselling if you need to. Don't be too hard on each other, just a light bit of fun, which sort of gets us started on the activity. What I'm going to do now is turn to page 12 of your workbooks, and you'll see there that there is a diagram. I'm going to talk you through this diagram. It's a little bit of revision for some, and for others, this may be the first time you're hearing it, which is okay. Now, what we're going to talk about here is what we call Q4 behavior. For some of you, this model of Q4 coaching will be revision. For some, it's the first time you've heard it. Okay, so you can see there Q1, 2, 3, and 4. And if you turn to page 12, your workbooks, work through it with me. So we're going to revise this. And the reason why we're going to revise it is because it'll become obvious in a second, because it's so intrinsically linked to Q4. Okay, this is a concept, Q4, that helps us to be our most effective when we're working in the practice. It doesn't matter what level we're working at. And often we get caught up in worrying about results, whether they be, profitability or financial related results that ultimately relate to the standard operating procedures of the practice. But our ability to achieve our various goals, whatever they happen to be, is rooted in our practice culture and how we go about things on a daily basis. So ultimately the results are important. But to get to those results, it's how we live and breathe the day-to-day output of the practice and how we operate on a daily basis. And this is where Q4 comes in. So to describe this, let's look firstly at the axes. Like I said, for some of you, this will be revision, but that's okay. The horizontal axis relates to how well we treat other people. And you can see on the right-hand side, high regard, and on the left-hand side, low regard. And I'm sure we've met people who treat other people at both ends of that spectrum. And the vertical axis is about how we get things done. So at the top, we make things happen and we get stuff done. At the bottom of the axis, we let things happen around us. Okay, so we could describe the bottom of that vertical arrow, we could describe that as being below the line type behavior. Stuff just happens around us as opposed to making things happen. All right, but of course, and that can also be related to how task focused you are. Some people put task ahead of people. Some people put people ahead of task. And you can see that when you've got those two extremes at play, and I call them extremes, when those two extremes are at play, then you've got then ultimately you can have a problem. If you're too people orientated, and that means nothing gets done, that's a problem. If you're too task orientated and you're brutal with those people that you're working for, that's also a problem. So let's just have a look at each of the quadrants. Q1. So we're making things happen, but we're doing it in a way that is with low regard to the individual. Okay, and we call that quadrant there the tell and do quadrant. So write that into your workbooks on page 12. We call that the tell and do quadrant. Q1. Q2. This one is where we let things happen. So it's the bottom of the vertical arrow, and we do so with a low regard for people. All right, so this is like a double whammy. So this one is really bad, and we call this one avoid and abdicate. So the sorts of things that we would see in avoid and abdicate are, I couldn't be bothered giving that person that task anymore because I know they won't do it, or they're just hopeless. So what's the point? But we don't do anything about it. We just kind of just avoid them. Q3 is where we let things happen. So that's not great, but at least we do it with a high regard for people, and we call this one socialize and pacify. Did I tell you Q2? Q2 is avoid and abdicate. Abdicate is spelled A-B-D-I-C-A-T-E, abdicate. And so it's avoid and abdicate Q2. Q3 is socialize and pacify. So you can imagine if you've just been promoted into a senior role, say head nurse, for example, and you've got all your mates around you still who are fellow nurses. Yesterday they were fellow nurses, and now you're the boss, or you've got more responsibility. Then it's very easy to slip into socializing and pacifying, and sort of saying, "Oh, look, don't worry about you doing it. I'll do it." That sort of thing. Okay, so it's just a little bit of revision on as we sort of progress. Now, the key here is that if Q4 was a country, okay, so imagine that's a country, then the language will be coaching. The language will be coaching. So this is why this model is so important to our discussion around coaching. Okay, let's have a look at our first poll. What I'd like you to do is I'd like you to identify the various roles that you play at work. Okay, so just go to your phones and poll them. Let's just get a sense as to what are the various roles that you play at work. Now, I know there's a whole bunch of things that you do outside of work, but let's just, like you're a mum or whatever. Okay, good. So veterinarian, good start. Good. Let's get some generic ones. I like that. So it's caretaking, counselor. I like that. A mentor, kennel hand. You're an organizer. You're a student. Great. Of course you are. You're all on this program. You're an anaesthetist. You're a helper. So you can see we've got all of these roles, haven't we? A phlebotomist. I haven't heard that one before. Okay, just hold it there. There's a nice one. Co-worker, an organisee, an organiser, a problem solver, a peer. That's a nice one. It's exactly what we are, isn't it? We're a team member. Okay, so let's just hold it there. We're going to add one to this list. All right, we're going to add one. And the one we're going to add is the coach. All right, so we're going to add coach. Why is coaching so important that we add to the list? And as we go through this model, you'll understand, particularly when we look at the key aspects to coaching. Before we do that, though, there's a couple of things we need to understand about what it means to be a coach. So we're all of these things, aren't we? Including a cleaner, but we're also a coach. This is a role we need to take on. This is how seriously we need to take it. Key aspects to a coach. So if you just turn to the top of page 15 in your workbooks, you'll see in there that a coach, the key aspects are that a coach asks more than tells. I'm going to drill down to the detail on these in a second, but a coach asks more than they tell. All right, that's a bit different to a mentor, isn't it? A mentor tells you what to do because a mentor's been there before. A mentor is more senior to you. They're someone that you might rely on for information when maybe you're struggling a little bit. Maybe it's a buddy, and we know when you first start working in the practice. Maybe it's the owner of the practice is a very senior veterinarian or surgeon, and they become a mentor to the vets, and similarly with the nurses. All right, but that's not a coach. You can imagine a mentor environment. A mentor environment is one where they might tell them what to do. But in a coaching environment, we've got to flip it on its head. So we've got to ask more than we tell. In a coaching style of conversation, the knowledge is with the coachee. So the knowledge is with the person who's being coached. That's a bit weird, isn't it? That changes it from a sporting coach, doesn't it? Delete sporting coach from your head. This is now a business coach or a practice coach. Okay, the knowledge is with the coachee, the person being coached. And when we coach, we transfer ownership to the coachee. It's a really, really critical part of why we bother coaching in the first place, is that transfer. So let's have a look at these in more detail. A coach asks more than tells. So I'm just going to read through this and highlight a couple of things. How often do we tell people what to do and they either don't listen or it just doesn't happen? So has that ever happened to you? Can you relate to that? When you're telling people what to do and it just doesn't happen? By asking the other person what they think, the coachee has to come up with their own solutions to things. So the coachee takes on an active role rather than a passive one of just listening. So have you ever heard yourself say to your kids, for example, or maybe if you're young, maybe your parents have said it to you, what did you do that for? Or why did you hit your brother or sister? Okay, we're hardwired for coaching by our parents. And yet when we enter the workforce, our language changes. A switch goes off in our mind that says we can't ask those really important style of questions that we would ask our kids, which are open-ended questions, coaching style questions. We can't ask them because we don't feel as though we can. In some ways, we think it's inappropriate to challenge and involve people in the solution. All right, so there we are back into Q4 again. Better just tell them what to do, especially if we're the manager. Okay, so the next time you hear yourself start to tell a team member what to do, try asking them what their thoughts are. You'll get two insights. You'll get an insight into whether they know the answer, but also an insight into how good your induction training is and whether you need to do more training and more development. All righty. And look, when we go into this style of language, are we outside of our values by challenging people and making sure that we're operating at the highest level of excellence and everybody being involved in that process? Okay. So ultimately, we're helping people to get better at their jobs. Would you agree? Okay. So the knowledge was with the coachee. Let's understand that a little bit now. So just on page 17 of your workbooks, we're going to do an exercise shortly, but not every conversation should be a coaching conversation. So we only coach when we know the coachee really does have the knowledge. And for whatever reason, they're electing to not act or not do what is required. And this can often be mistaken for, this lack of knowledge can often be mistaken for lack of confidence, or the other way around. So someone who just lacks confidence because they're junior and you're an overbearing senior veterinarian or senior head nurse or practice manager, you can actually have quite an overbearing effect on people when you start to ask them questions. Just because they don't come up with an answer straight away doesn't necessarily mean they don't have the knowledge. It may be they're just lacking confidence. Okay, let's just practice this. I'd like to pair up now, and we're just going to do this exercise for the next 6 minutes or so. And in fact, I might cut this back just in terms of timing. We'll go through these scenarios there on page 18 of your workbooks now. I've given you 2 answers. I'd like you to come up with a third for each of the scenarios. It should only take you about 10 seconds or so to come up with each one. So there are, let's have a quick look. There are 5 scenarios. So just about a minute on each one. I think the timesheet has 2 minutes. So what we'll do is about a minute on each one, and then switch over. So one person makes the statement. I'll give you an example. Scenario 1, we want one person to be the coachee. I could never do that. okay? The coach has to then ask some questions. And I've given you 2 examples. I'd like you to think of a third. All right, so in this case, what is it that's stopping you? Or how could you get to a point where you do know what to do, or where you could do it? What's another question you could ask there? Scenario 1. So gurus, just work with everyone. I'm going to give you about 3 minutes or so to work through this in pairs, about a minute each and a minute in changeover. Work through those 5 scenarios, and everybody have a turn at coming up with their own coaching questions, and there's some examples there for you. Page 18 to 22 of your workbooks. Okay, gurus, just get the coachees to switch now with the coaches, and just either continue working through those scenarios or start from the beginning again and come up with fresh ideas. Okay, I've started the next 2 minutes off. Just continue for another minute or so, and then we'll wrap up that exercise. Okay, sorry, gurus. I'm going to call it up there. I'm just looking ahead through the module. I think I'm going to put my hand up here and say I've probably put a bit too much into this module. So, but that's okay. We're going to finish bang on time at 12 o'clock. So for those people who have got consults waiting from midday, we'll finish spot on 12 o'clock. We may not get through it all. What I would say though, gurus and teams, that exercise is a really important exercise to maybe come back to and reflect on in one of your team meetings. Maybe just take the time during that team meeting to have a little bit more of a discussion around that, because it's really important that we get these coaching style of questions worked out as best we can. Alrighty, let's just have a look now at the value of coaching. Okay, now the value of coaching can really be expressed in a particular formula, and that is quality times commitment equals value. So quality of the outcome. Okay, if we ask someone to sweep the floor, how well do they sweep the floor? What's the quality or the end result? The commitment, so how dedicated are they to keep going when faced with adversity or faced with a challenge? might strike them as they on their while they're doing their particular task. And then if we multiply those two together, we get the value of that particular conversation. So what we're going to do now is we're going to look at two scenarios. The first scenario we're going to look at is where the more experienced manager tells the team member what to do. So if we go back to our original 4-quadrant model, what we're talking about here is this is top left-hand quadrant, isn't it? The tell and do quadrant. Make things happen, but with a low regard for the person by telling them what to do. Now, what happens with the quality? The quality goes through the roof, doesn't it? Because if it's a task that you're good at and you've been doing for years and you're the manager and you've been there for 20 years and this is something you're really, really familiar with, you can stand there and you can tell that person exactly what to do and you'll get a really high quality outcome. What will their attitude be? Probably not that great. So their commitment to it will really be only the effort that you're putting in as the manager, as opposed to the effort that they're putting in and having to come up with their own ideas or maybe work around issues as those challenges hit them in the face while they're trying to get the job done. Okay, it's fairly obvious, I would have thought. In particular, what happens when you're not there as the manager, when you have that style about you? What happens when you go away on a holiday for 2 weeks? Anyone going away on a holiday right now and is worried about what might happen while they're away? Have a think about this model and how this model might be able to be used to help turn that around. Okay, and we can see there that we get a value of 30. Let's have a look though now at scenario 2. This is where the more experienced manager asks the team member what they intend to do. So they might ask purely because they don't want to just let them go at it because it's too dangerous. It could be anesthetizing an animal, or it could be a particular. They've spayed plenty of cats before, but never spayed a dog before, for example. So it could be where the manager asks the team member, okay, so before we get started on this, let's just go through it from the top. What's your plan? What's your plan of attack? Now, they might come back with a plan of attack that's only a quality of 6 because I could do it better and I could tell them what to do, which would be better. But the reality is, in its purest coaching form, I'm actually just going to let them run with it. As long as it's not crazy, as long as it's not, so far off track, it's silly, I'm going to let them run with it. But what I want them committed. I want them to stand behind their ideas. I might ask them some challenging questions along the way to say, okay, so you talked about doing this at stage 3. What's your rationale behind that? Where are you coming from? Talk me through what that might look like. So I might ask more probing questions, but I want them to come up with the answer. We've talked plenty about this transfer of ownership, haven't we, and the importance of the transfer of ownership. So the commitment, particularly at the end, when I don't ruin it and say good plan, when I just say, okay, let's check in at the end, you've now got that ball, haven't you, and you're running with it. And the team member is running with the ball, and if they hit a barrier, it won't be, I hit a barrier, the boss told me to do this, so therefore it didn't work, so therefore it's the boss's problem. Hit a barrier, this was my plan, I better make sure I go around this barrier as much as I possibly can. Let's compare the two scores. So if we compare the first style of the tell and do, which is a 30, and the second style, which is a challenge and involve, is a 60. And we drop that into our chart there, you can see straight away exactly how that plays out and the importance of it. So that's just that actually came from a National Australia Bank executive, that model. I really, really liked that I was working with. I really liked it. For me, it really resonated in how we can transfer. So the downsides with that, though, isn't there? We got to drop quality. Let's just go back up a slide. Look at that, 6. Who's willing to do that? Who's willing to say, you know what, I'm head nurse, I've got this new nurse, I'm trying to develop this nurse. If I adopt a coaching style of language and ask them what their plan is, rather than just telling them what to do, I know I'm going to take a hit in quality. But I'm going to get a much better outcome because their commitment and their focus and their attention to detail and their willingness to push through when they hit obstacles is going to be there. So give me that conversation anytime. And when I'm working with teams of people and I see that style of language kicking in, and I see a willingness in the leader to take a step back and say, you know what, I don't necessarily need the quality here to be perfect, but what I do need is I need them behind it. I need them pushing. I don't want to be me constantly dragging them or pushing them to get it done. So, when we talk about washing up in a break room, right? So go to the tea room and the washing up doesn't get done. Can we use this style of language to change the conversation? To say, okay, so what's our plan, guys, this week for the break room? Because I tell you what's not going to happen. I'm not going to wash up every day for everybody. So what's the plan? And then someone says, oh, we'll all do our own. How can I use coaching language and then turn that back on them and say, how's that going to work? So let's talk through that. What's got to happen for that to work? And so how can we be committed? And then there's a whole bunch of other things around accountability that we can feed into that, can't we? But you can see that by asking that, what's the plan in the kitchen this week? That's much better, potentially much more effective than, okay, everybody's to do their own washing up. Like, definition of insanity is to continue doing the same thing and expect a different result. So maybe we can feed some of that into some of those really easy conversations as well, or some of the things that we might consider to be more simple. Now, this next exercise, gurus, I'm just going to get you to run this exercise, not now because I'm concerned about time, but this is a really great exercise to do in your teams. What I'd suggest you do as part of this month's team meetings is to run this exercise. Get everybody to sit in a circle, and you can see this is sort of mapped out. Where are we? Yeah, this is mapped out on page 24 of your work booklets. I'll just get you to do that exercise in your own time, but everyone ask a coaching style question. So, it can be really simple. What time is it? Okay, and actually before that, let's just talk about what coaching style questions are. Turn to page 23 of your work booklets. So I jumped ahead. Turn to page 23 of your workbook, and we cover this a little bit in revision. But what are coaching style questions? So I'm not going to poll this one because I've already covered it, but we're looking at open and closed questions. And so closed questions are those that can be answered with a yes or no, and open questions can't. So a coaching style question is an open one. And the most powerful ones start with what, so just circle this in your work booklets there on page 23, what and how, followed by who, when, and where. So what and how? What's your plan? How's that going to work? Can you see how that evokes that thinking from the team member? They've got to actually, they've got to take an active role in this conversation now, don't they? Why questions tend to elicit a defensive response. Why did you do that? Why would you do that? As you can see, that just the tone just doesn't sound as nice, does it? It's sort of there in the notes there. It's sort of an accusatory tone. Why did you do something as opposed to what happened, or how could we have gotten a better outcome? Okay, so just a subtle use of those words. You can practice that in your teams now, not now, but later on. Practice that in a circle. So what time is it? When are we going to finish today? What's your plan for this particular activity? How long do we have to sit in a circle and ask each other these questions? Doesn't matter, but the whole idea is that you get used to asking that style of question. Okay? Good. So do that. You see there on page 24 of your workbook, it's page 21 of the Guru Guide. You can see there some really nice questions that you can follow up with afterwards. That's a nice little exercise to go through. Okay. Let's have a look now at formal coaching. All right, so what we've been talking about with these sort of open questions is quite informal coaching. It's designed around transferring ownership and getting other people to get involved in the thinking process. Let's have a look now at formal coaching, and the particular model that we go with is GROW. Now, I'm only going to go through high level on this. This is very much Lead to Succeed material. But the first one is goal. What is it that you're trying to achieve? How will you know when you're there? What's it going to look like? What's important to you right now? What's your biggest priority? They're all goal style questions, aren't they? Then we go into the reality. And so the reason why I want to know about reality is I want to know it's like a gap analysis. So I say, so where are you now? In relation to that goal, where do you think you sit today? How big is the gap? Can you hear my language? They're all questions. Then we go into options. So given the fact that you want to achieve this in the next 3 months, and given the fact that right now you'd say that your current reality is that, you know, you're a fair way off that, what have you thought about? What have you put in place up to date? What have you tackled already? These are all options questions. What do you think is the best? Sorry, what ideas have you come up with that you think resonate the best? Why do those questions resonate? Or what is it about those? There you go. There's a why accusatory. What is it about those, about that particular option that resonates the most for you? Really good questions, aren't they, to get that person thinking and thinking. And then we get into the way forward. Okay, given that they're the options, where do you think's the best place to start? Okay. So you can see there that in a formal coaching style of questions, sometimes we switch the G and the R around. So sometimes if someone comes, they're standing in front of us, they're crying or whatever, they're really upset, you say, mate, what's going on? What's going on is a reality question, isn't it? So what happened? And then you might, once after you've sort of worked through that and say, so, you know, showing some empathy, so that's terrible. So, okay, so look, what do you think we need to do to fix this? Now, I could switch into mentoring role, couldn't I? And I could say, righto, what you need to do, sit down, I want you to think about this, I want you to da-da-da-da, and I could just start to dictate what's going to happen. What happens to ownership at that point? Who owns that outcome? Or can I keep the outcome with them or keep that ownership with them? Okay, so the whole idea of this is just to give a formal structure to the whole process. Don't forget, when you're coaching someone, it's not about you and how good your questions are. It's about them and getting them talking about their issue. And what this structure does is just gives you a nice, easy breakdown or structured way to have that conversation and keep the conversation with the right focus. Okay, let's just have a look now at. We're just going to do got a polling question here. Let me just see. I'll come to that in a second. Don't worry about the poll just yet. Okay. And there's obviously lots of questions that can go into that GROW model, which you can work through. Coaching's application to goal setting is an important thing to understand. And we're always sort of at that point where in the practice where we're discussing how to goals, what are our goals and what are we're trying to achieve. And the reason why goal setting is so important is, and we're going to cover goal setting in a later module, but the reason why it's so important is that your goals should be reviewed regularly, not just once per year, and they help us to understand exactly what's expected of us. And importantly, if coaching is used to establish goals, then, you know, a simple question like how best do you think you can support the practice goals, as opposed to you will do this, then we can really stand behind our goals, can't we? So you can see that transfer of ownership with goals is a really, really important one. So coaching and goal setting are really tightly aligned. Okay, let's have a look at page 28 of your work booklets now. We've covered off quite a few bits and pieces. Let's just have a quick poll. What are some of the benefits to the team of coaching? What are some of the benefits? It could be a team or team members, or what are you seeing now? Yeah, great. Engagement. Spot on. Yeah, whoever said development take a bow, it's actually in the opening slide. Coaching is so tightly linked to development. Yeah, and building confidence. Well done. That's fantastic, because it's exactly what it does. It builds confidence as long as it's done in a nice way. That's just a great list. Look at that. Great. And look, you know, we've got to practice, haven't we? We have to find our language for this, don't we? So it doesn't come across as rude or anything, but we just got to do it, you know, just do it. Just go out and do it and see what happens. And you'll find that if we can get this embedded in the culture, it's not such a big deal. It's not, you know, they're happier workers right there in the middle, just underneath personal commitment there. See that happier workers? It's so important. People want to grow. People want to get better. And unless we start to do this stuff, they simply won't. They It'll be your ideas. It won't be their ideas. Now, just a couple of pitfalls before we close. Avoid giving advice. Focus on helping the team member help themselves by coming to their own conclusions. Remember that you will get a better outcome if you take a small risk, reduce that from a 10 to a 6, and let them come to their own conclusions. It's really hard to coach when you have a lot of knowledge on the subject, and I'll accept that. It's very, very difficult to coach because it's so much easier just to tell them what to do. When you're under pressure, it becomes easier to tell people what to do. Okay, when you're under a lot of pressure, you got to recognize that and go, okay, like if a car accident victim comes in and you've got a junior vet there and you're a senior vet, and for you it's a no-brainer, you know exactly what to do, you're a senior nurse, you know exactly what to do. Those moments, you don't get that many of them. Just use those moments to develop your team. Go straight to, obviously the care of the animal is number one, but go straight to your team and say, okay, what do you think we should be doing now? What's the first thing we need to be thinking about? Now, I'm sure a lot of you do this anyway naturally, but what's the first thing we need to be thinking about? And turn to that junior vet or turn to that junior nurse and say, what's our priority? Straight up. Now, you already know, right? You're going to get an answer in 5 seconds. Take the opportunity of that 5 seconds to ask the question. That's coaching. That's exactly what coaching is. Obviously, there's certain circumstances when you can't do that. Okay, and the last one is when you make a mistake, when you mistake a lack of confidence for a lack of knowledge. And I think if you can help those people to develop that confidence, make them feel comfortable. Don't forget, 20% of our communication is our tone. 70% is our body language. With tone and body language, you can make someone feel just as comfortable with a really hard question. You can do that. Okay, good. Bit rushed today, guys. Sorry, we packed a lot in. We've got a minute and a half to go. Let's just clarify these training objectives. The first one is to understand why coaching is a valuable tool in the development of other people. And how can we use that tool to develop people? Don't be afraid of it. It's really powerful. And we can see now how it differs from, say, a sporting coach. That's not to say that the Blindside video doesn't have some really great stuff in it around just watch what she does. Watch the triggers that she pulls out for and look at her style. If you haven't watched the video, think about the style of asking the questions. Just watch what she does and how she asks the questions and how powerful that is. It's quite funny as well. How to coach. So we've talked about using open questions, maybe avoid why, keep those questions firing. On a more formal basis, we can use the GROW model if we want to, and we can go GROW, we can go RGOW if that makes more sense. Sometimes we'll get to O options, we'll go back to goal because we might go backwards and forwards up and down that scale because something doesn't make sense. And also to understand why it's often hard to coach and how we can avoid some of those pitfalls, particularly when you have a lot of knowledge. Okay, that's the end of coaching. Well, that's the beginning of coaching. So good luck, everybody. Get those photographs in on WhatsApp, Gurus. I'd love to see them, get some feedback. We're finishing right on time. Have a great rest of the day. Cheers.